Welcome to CXO, a magical podcast to help you serve better and concoct experiences that are superlative in nature. I'm your host, Supriya Sharma, bringing to you in each episode didactic nuggets so you can get inspired to sprinkle stardust in your company, your home, and the community on the whole.
On CXO today is Stine Marsal, who's the leading CX expert in Denmark with more than 15 years of practical experience driving the work on CX for B2C as well as B2B customers. Within three of the biggest Danish brands in the experience industry, you name it, it's Copenhagen Zoo, Tivoli Gardens, and the Copenhagen Airport. Stine is the CEO of CXomatic and the founder of a newly launched Scandinavian CX community, Experience Management Community. Welcome to CXO, Stine.
Thank you so much.
So Stine, I just read about your community here, which is the Scandinavian CX community. So people from other parts of the world like us, are we good to join that as well?
If you speak Danish, Swedish, or Norwegian fluently, you will have fun. It's for people that are working inside companies, driving the CX agenda from within. So the reason I made the community is that when I was Service Excellence Director in Copenhagen Airport, I found myself quite isolated from other people also struggling or excelling with implementation. And so my idea to make this community came from wanting to reach out to other people that had an actual, practical experience with CX, because I found a lot of the stuff that I found on LinkedIn or, some of the bigger international books on CX, I just couldn't basically see how some of those ideas would fly in an actual operation of a company. So it's a very sort of practically oriented community for people, driving the CX agenda from within a company.
Brilliant. So coming to driving the CX agenda in an organization, where does it all start? Does it start with the culture or it starts with the strategy?
I like to say that it can start in both ends. I did a lot of interviews over the summer with potential members for the community that I just launched, and basically the CX managers and directors out there, depending on how their position in the company originated and where exactly they are placed in the hierarchy, they either have the challenge to drive the agenda, out into the front of the company. How do I get all these different departments to own up to the CX agenda, and others have the challenge to get top management to prioritize it more. But I would say a successful CX implementation always starts with top management being on board in some shape or form. Otherwise, everyone loses focus. With that said, there are very successful CX practitioners that have started in a role where it wasn't highly prioritized, but have spent their first years really communicating about the CX agenda, upwards in the organization. So, when I started in Copenhagen Airport, I was fortunate that what we call CX, but in the airport it was called Service Excellence, was part of like a strategic leg, if you will. Yeah. So it had quite a lot of attention from top management. But I think one of the challenges at the time, and it's recently that I have come to have this understanding, where in some organizations it definitely makes sense to say that customer experience or to say that customer experience should be sort of our common religion. How do we excel towards the customer? But there are parts of organizations and sometimes entire organizations where framing CX in that way just simply does not make sense. So I think there are sort of two directions you can take your CX work in when you sit as a practitioner at the inside of an organization. It's either to have the ambition to become the religion, or it's to have the ambition to be the best support function for the organization in a way where you facilitate everyone reaching their strategic growth goals. And the latter is definitely more functional in companies where there is some form of regulation, like safety, security, patient safety. Now, I'm sorry, I don't know all of those technical terms in English, but I'm sure you get sort of what I mean.
Sure.
Because there is no, airport that would ever be allowed to say, it's a better customer experience if we just let people pass through without, looking if they're carrying, dangerous items. So we have to do something that disturbs the customer experience, but obviously we can work with the customer experience toolbox and say, is there any way we can code the stuff we have to do in a way where sort of the pill goes down smoother, So, and when I bring up this sort of different way of looking at CX, it's because I came, when I started in the airport, from Tivoli Gardens, which is the largest tourist attraction in Denmark. And so there, it's all about the guest experience, sort of like Disney, it's all about providing that, dazzling experience for the guests. Where in the airport, there were a lot of other things that you had to perform on as well.
Right.
So some managers had a difficult time when they were approached with, we should have customer experience first, because obviously if we don't have safety and security first, we're going to be shut down as an airport.
Correct.
So just to say, one of the biggest tasks I had was in the beginning was to frame, what can I do to make your department excel and reach its strategy by using my toolbox, so sorry, that was a very long talk about religion and support function, but I think it's quite important as a practitioner to know what makes sense for the organization that you're in.
Yeah, that toolbox thing
sorry,
really makes sense, because as you mentioned, there could be different organizations with different stories, and the experience which we want to provide to the customers varies in both the cases. But ultimately, at the end of the day, however you do it, whatever tools you use, whether you use a spanner or you use a hammer, all you're targeting is the customer experience, and you want it to be great for your customers. You want your customers to remember the experience you created for them as a brand. But Stine, can I just confess something?
Yeah.
All the while that you were talking and you were explaining about the toolbox and the customer experience, my focus was only on two words: the airport and the Tivoli Gardens, because the inner child in me was awakened. And all I wanted to do was to take a flight and come to Tivoli Gardens and have that Disney kind of an experience, which would be so lovely. So excuse me for that.
You're very welcome to come and have a great experience in Copenhagen. Then you can learn Danish and become part of my community.
Oh, that's a bonus that comes with it. Brilliant. And when we talk about creating this culture in the organization of customers being paramount or customers being of real importance, how do we help our employees or our staff or our team members to focus their attention on customers? Is it through rewarding the experience matrix like the CSAT or the NPS? Or on the other hand, we should reward the behaviors of our employees towards the customers? Which works better? Is it rewarding basis on the matrix or rewarding the behaviors?
I think it totally depends on what kind of organization you are and what type of employees and the culture in the country you're in and things. But I can share how I've worked and what worked and what didn't. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Net Promoter Score, but I'm also not the opposite. What I do like about it is the customer comments that you get. So one of the drivers of passenger satisfaction in an airport is the security checkpoint, because it is, for many something that sets off anxiety, and they are insecure about whether they are, doing something wrong by the way they pack their bags. And, I'm sure I don't have to elaborate on, and most people know what it means to go through security. But so, if an airport performs well in the security checkpoint, basically the satisfaction with the airport in general goes up. And when satisfaction goes up, it means people are more relaxed and they are more prone to shopping. So there's a good business case in that. The way that I believe we always have to work with customer experience is make it tangible for the people that are expected to execute something. So if the strategy is we want to provide extraordinary customer experiences, or we want to dazzle our guests, as which was the case in Tivoli Gardens, then you really have to figure out what is the most important touch point we have, and what is it people should do. Like when you sell a hot dog, how extraordinary can it get? Like, what is it that makes that interaction extraordinary, and should it be? So there's part of what you need to do first, obviously, is prioritize between the gazillion touch points you have. And then you need to not make, like, I'm going to say it like it is, sorry, but then you need to not F up, no extreme dips in the customer journey, obviously. But so prioritizing the touch points that are super important. And so what I did with the security checkpoint is a pirate version of Net Promoter Score. And I say pirate because anyone listening to this podcast will think, how can you ask someone if they are likely to recommend a security check in an airport that basically has monopoly, because it's the only large airport within, an area. So you can't ask that question. But I used the system around Net Promoter Score in a very primitive way, but driving great results. So what we did was we made 200 interviews, 200 to 250 interviews, every 6 months only. And the Copenhagen Airport at the time had 30 million passengers per year. And 11 million of those were local departing. So we had 11 million, a checkpoint reaching 11 million customers per year. And I did 200 interviews twice a year. And why did I do that? Well, first of all, or why did I only do 200 interviews? First of all, basically, I paired the findings that we got with complaints that we get, with input from the people working on the floor. What do we experience as difficult situations? And what we could see is, first of all, I need to say, the results of the Net Promoter Score were extremely positive, much more positive than I had expected. So we had 70% replying 9 or 10 and leaving a comment. So what I did with those comments was I put them on a poster. So every 6 months, there were new posters going up with a new color, and put them in the break room of the staff so they could see, when we really excel, what is it we have actually done? What we could see was the theme was a good explanation. People that get a good explanation for something evaluated as really well. What we could also see in the 0 to 6 comments, which were only 7%. So you can imagine, like, we have 200 people. So it's very few comments that are actually in this percentage. However, what we could see was some were responding to staff behavior being, for instance, one of the words appearing several times was the person was being arrogant. Now, what we could also see, a larger percentage, was the comments revealed that they didn't understand something relating to the rules or regulations. So, for instance, why do I have to take up my iPad in Copenhagen Airport? I just flew out of Amsterdam and I didn't have to. So you guys must be harassing me for whatever reason. And so when do you become, arrogant or annoyed or aggressive? Basically, if you have a sort of a process goal, we have to process a certain amount of passengers per minute to have them reach their planes in time, and to have, you know, the service level agreement that we have with airlines, we have to perform according to that. So you're under pressure from time. At the same time, maybe you're not sure if you're allowed to say what the explanation is, or maybe you don't know it. So what I did specifically was I took out 7 employees, and we did a workshop, and I said, okay, so these are the issues that I see in the customer feedback. Now, I know none of you go to work trying to be arrogant or aggressive. And I know the comments are few. However, how can we somehow appear, you know, as competent as I know you guys are? How can we wrap this in a way that makes sense? So I asked all employees with an email and said, in the cases where passengers do not understand the rules and they don't make sense, let me know what are those. You like, tell me the situation. So I got a lot of also data from employees that I paired with the Net Promoter, the Net Pirate score. And one of the, and then we did a brainstorm. How can we make this one specific issue that was very prevalent? You know, there are different procedures in different airports. How can we somehow make this something that the passenger understands? So we came up with some phrases that would, you know, help make sense of, you know, why that is. So the explanation is there's different technical equipment.
Right.
So to live up to the same rules, there will be different procedures, you know. So to be able to say that, we could see once those sentences, I called it my idea catalog, was sent out, there were no comments saying that staff had been, you know, aggressive or annoying, or annoyed. You know, all of a sudden the comments were in the 0 to 6 category changed, and they were, well, he could have smiled more, or, you know, maybe it was too early in the morning for him to be in a good mood, or for her to be, you know, it was much softer statement than what we saw in the first round. And so driving the change by involving the employees was extremely effective for me. But I know that in other cultures, sitting with someone from, I mean, from ranking high in the organization and driving this would not, like, it would be super intimidating. And so it works in the Scandinavian culture really well. But I also know in other parts of the world that would be completely, I mean, utopia to do it in that way.
And what I feel here is what helped you reframe that experience for the customers was communication at the end of the day. The communication that needed to flow to them so they understood why you were doing what you were doing, or why the person who was interacting with them was doing what she or he was doing. So communication is key in that regard. And I'm sure we as customers, we all understand when something is communicated to us, or at least we make an attempt to understand. And that kind of smoothens the experience on both the sides. Stine, in your,
but I mean, it's a great challenge in the security checkpoint. It was a challenge because what are we allowed to say, you know? So we had to sort of, from case to case, you know, go by what are we actually allowed to explain, you know?
Makes sense.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
In your work with the airport and the Copenhagen Zoo and the Tivoli Gardens, did you ever feel working with your teams that driving the culture was becoming a challenging thing because customers are considered as, you know, a fluffy or imprecise or just nice to be business objective, rather than, you know, especially when they're compared with the bottom line? What I mean to say is customer experience or the interaction with the customers is considered much more softer than being tangible, as you just explained in the previous example. So did you ever face that challenge with the teams?
Can you ask me that question again?
Yeah, sure. So one of the stumbling blocks that companies face is when they're trying to create a CX-driven culture. Then in that case, what happens is many of the team members who are not the part of the customer experience function, they feel that anything to do with customers is fluffy, or it's imprecise, or it's just nice to have business objective. And it's something that cannot be measured, you know, making a customer happy or making the customer feel loyal towards the organization. Many people in the organization feel that it cannot be measured and it's just a softer aspect. So did you ever have that chance, or did you ever have that challenge with your teams in helping them understand, okay, it's not just a software aspect, but something that really impacts the business and the bottom line that we talk about in the boardrooms?
Well, I think that in the airport we had a lot of data on customer experience, and the passenger experience was definitely, there was an individual or there was an employee bonus. There were other parameters than just passenger satisfaction, but that was one of 3 parameters that could mean that a bonus was paid out to all employees. So I think passenger experience was very much the center of focus. But what was challenging in the airport is that the foundation of there even being passengers is the business to business customers, the airlines,
right,
and the ground handlers. And so sometimes there are conflicting needs between the passenger and airlines and ground handlers. So that, I think, was some of the more interesting times where I really had, because we were, I was not driving anything on my own. So just to say, I was always with managers of that department or managers of that department. But one of the challenges, for instance, was, if you arrive with a flight from a certain destination or from a certain type of airline, you would arrive, here. So you would go down to the baggage delivery, and it would be logical to say the baggage belt closest should be where my baggage comes. That would provide a great passenger experience. However, the airline is paying a ground handler to, take your baggage out of the plane and drive them into the baggage factory and put them up on the right belt. And so if that ground handler were to have staff in 5 locations, because, one flight is arriving here, another over there, it would be super expensive for the airline, and they are not interested in that. So sometimes, we'd have to compromise and say, well, it's more important that the ground handler has an efficient operation and that the airline don't have to pay, a gazillion bucks to actually arrive in our airport. So, so that's one of the challenges that that we had in the airport, not that I had, but we had when looking at experience. Whose experience is more important, the passenger or the airlines or the ground handlers, or but what I do feel was sometimes a challenge is to have an understanding throughout the organization, what is it that the front line staff is encountering, what are their issues, and have those issues lifted, to a level where we could actually change things. So that would sometimes be a challenge. And one of the things that was that I came to learn was taking up the most mental space for many of the staff meeting the passenger, either in check-in or security or in the information point, would be, as digital solutions become better and better, all of the simple customers handle themselves, right? All of the simple customers, the customers that have a simple issue, that are happy-go-lucky, they handle themselves on our digital solutions. Whereas the customers that are left for frontline staff then becomes the ones that either have complicated issues, that are already frustrated because they tried the digital solution and it didn't work, or they are, for whatever reason, they are super stressed and just cannot deal with digital. They want a person. So the level of conflict over a number of years has gone up. So the situations that the frontline staff would be facing were really difficult. Like, what do you do when someone screams in your face, or someone has so much stress that a little tiny detail sets them off in some way, and it's hard to get through, so to have that become the focal point of how we should, train our staff, and have that become like an issue that we should be aware of, that was a challenge.
Hmm. And that's not only with the airports. I think with many other industries with more of technology coming in, whether it's
Yes.
banking or it's online shopping, anything, you name it.
Yeah.
With the technology coming in, things have become easier for some customers when they have simple issues that can be sorted out on their own. But yes, when there are complicated issues or with irate customers, we need more competent staff to be dealing with them. And staff who's more empathetic and more compassionate towards the needs of the customers makes total sense. Stine, my last question to you here for today.
Well,
What are
yeah,
your
and
thoughts on the Customer Experience Month? What are your thoughts on the Customer Experience Month, which is going on? So is it just good enough to have 1 month in the entire year dedicated to our customers?
I didn't know there was a customer experience month. So that says something about how much that takes up on my agenda, I guess. Denmark is not generally very big on, today it's World whatever day, or this is whatever month. So I think that's probably in some other cultures in the world that's, taking place. No, but I mean, I really think that what's important, obviously, I mean, you won't get me to say that customer experience is not important, but I think for many practitioners, it's important to know the kind of organization you are supporting and not look at it as though, you're failing if CX is not the religion of the company, but to look at it as how can you facilitate that the company reaches its strategy? Because let's face it, sometimes a company will need to make, cut on costs for whatever reason. It could be COVID-19.
Yeah.
We have to cut cost. Some airports maybe in the world right now provide excellent customer experience. I bet you that those are government funded and it's a prestige project for that government. Other airports that are privately owned probably don't provide as excellent a customer experience right now. But so the CX function would be to assure that as well as we can within the framework that is set, we will deliver that customer experience. We know it can't be excellent right now. Staff has been cut, passenger numbers go up, a lot of new staff are coming in and they have to learn. So yeah, the experience won't be excellent, but it will be as good as it can within the framework that we have, right? And so in some organizations, that is really how you should drive your CX, is to think about how can I help the organization reach its goal by the toolbox that I have. And in other organizations, and those are the ones we read about, Disney and Amazon, Zappos, there we can make the customer God and align all processes. But if you enter a company that has 100 years history, has, 18 different types of employees that are organized in different unions and have different roles, it's very, very difficult to go and say, let's make the customer God and everything we do should perform, because there are a lot of rules and regulations within each union. And there's, we can't just overlap and do things the smooth way always. So what can you do as a CX practitioner that brings you to the best possible level? That's, I don't like strategies that say we should deliver extraordinary or we should deliver, magical experiences. Because I think the most important is that we look at the difficult situations that we have. Where do we not perform? And we constantly fix the bottom level, because that way at some point you'll reach excellence. But there's such a focus on the dazzling and the fireworks and the stuff that looks good sharing on LinkedIn, that the unsexy stuff, like getting the hard situations right, is sometimes overlooked because it's just not as glamorous as doing a talk on how, we aligned all processes to lead to the fantastic customer experience.
Sure, it's not too great to talk about those things. And yes, we don't post on social media about those things, and we post about all the good and dazzling stuff that we or our organizations have done. But I feel magic can also be created in a moment where we know that the customer is already pissed off with us and we know the customer is facing a real issue. So if we come across as someone who can solve that issue for them, or we can just make things easier or simpler for them, I still feel it is magic for that customer, because again, it's on a different scale and it's all relatable. Thank you.
Sure, but believing that you can imagine believing that you should deliver magic for 30 million passengers every, that's unrealistic. But one of the things that when I say one of the things that I care about the most is making stuff tangible, right? So I gave the example with giving the good explanation and security. Yes. What are the exact words that explain this? Now, I implemented something that I call the 3-meter rule, which I think originally came from Disney, and then it was adopted a little bit. It was adopted a version of it in Tivoli, where, within a radius of 3 meters, you pick up trash. And so when I started as customer experience manager in Tivoli, I said, okay, how can I piggyback sort of on that, on that already existing culture and make it like our bottom level is we look people in the eye and we smile, we pick up trash, and we help guests that look like they might need help. Okay, so that's super tangible. That never dazzled anyone, but it's a level that we all agree on. We're not going to sort of sink below. And so I believe firmly in always creating something very tangible for whoever is expected to execute on your strategy. So what does that mean in cleaning? How do I perform, something that is a bottom level in cleaning? Okay, so when I block off a toilet, I make sure that there's a sign saying where the next toilet is, for instance. It's not excellent, but at least we don't have people peeing their pants looking for the toilet. And that's also quite glamorous if you think about it.
Yeah. Well, yes, practical stuff out there. Thanks for joining us, Stine. We really enjoyed talking to you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to CXO with your host, Supriya. I hope you enjoyed a dive into the nitty-gritty of customer experience. If you are committed to applying these ideas in the real world, stay tuned with me. Don't forget to check out all the links and resources in the show notes. That's all for this episode, folks. See you next time.